Okay, so hey everybody, I'm here with Derek with Nominivore Games. Do you think you could tell me a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your system of Emberwind?
Sure thing. Hello, it's nice to be here. Um, so I'm kind of a weirdo when it comes to the whole game development world. I didn't study game design or anything. I actually am classically trained as a mental health professional. I've got my graduate degrees in psychology and philosophy, and I kind of fell into game design. Um, this is listed like on our website and everything under my profile as a bit of like a tongue-in-cheek thing about how it was through like a steady diet of geek media. I mean, playing games, watching anime, all that fun stuff that I know everyone here can probably relate to. But the other half of that particular equation that like I don't play up quite as much is that professional side with me. I spent many years studying, learning about, and even traveling the world to do therapy with people from all these different walks of life. And I quickly kind of realized from all of my experiences doing all that that therapy isn't all it's cut out to be.
Okay.
And I don't mean that in any way to like offend any therapists who are listening to this, and for people who are considering or currently going to therapy. It's very important that you continue to do so because it is beneficial. It can help. All sorry, all I really mean by that statement is that it's not necessarily something that I felt everyone benefited from, right? Especially if you factor in things like cost, where to see a therapist, it's not cheap, and at least in Canada and the States, funding for that type of thing is very few and far between. So when I started thinking to myself about all that, and one of the like truest things about all of psychotherapy, which is that as a therapist, your goal is to work yourself out of a job, right? To make sure that this person is mentally and emotionally well enough to never need you again. Um, a large part about that is establishing or helping that particular individual establish a potent, uh, you know, available, strong support group and support network around them. And what better way to do that than through something like a hobby, right? Something like a tabletop game that you can bring people together with, that people can enjoy and play and experience games through, and have these experiences that really aren't just like putting two people together in a room and forcing them to be friends, but something that you can build off of, and uh find, and more than just with the relationship that you currently have, but maybe hopefully find even more people out there, especially if you're one of those individuals that don't have that in your life.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I know that just from my perspective, I grew up in Midwest U.S. and I moved down to Texas for a job, and it was actually through tabletop games that I managed to find the group of friends that I currently have now. It just so happened to be that the guy setting up my internet was a huge nerd. Saw that I had some tabletop stuff and video games. We bonded over that, and then he ended up inviting me to his group, and now I've got this group of friends that I've had for a couple of years now. So like I for one definitely know the benefits of that, and I know that I've seen other people make friends through tabletop games. So I guess could you tell me a little bit about how did you take those elements and put that into Emberwind when you were designing it? Because one thing that I've noticed with the system is that it's very beginner friendly.
Right. Yeah, I'm happy to dive into all that. I don't know how deep you want me to go, so at any point that I go off the deep end, just let me know.
Okay.
um, so like what you're talking about, right? The experience that you had, where you found someone, you picked up a group, and now you've got like these great friends that you're building all these memories with. That's not a unique story, right?
Mhm.
It's your story, and it's a very important story, but it's not a unique one. And in the
Absolutely.
same way, uh, the experience that I'm trying to build with Emberwind, with the games that I kind of put together in general, isn't unique either, right? It's about trying to get people into those particular moments, those relationships where you can not only uh, experience something new, but specifically experience it with other people around you. Because, like, I'm certain, like gone to like a movie right before in the
Yeah.
theaters, way back before the public health crisis was there. And
Yeah.
watching a movie by yourself is completely different than watching that movie with friends, right? Like it changes the complete dynamic, what you get out of it, and so forth. So, so when it came to Emberwind, and kind of how I put it together, all of the kind of psychological principles and everything that I put into it to try and encourage and help improve kind of the mental health care and state of the people that play it, it kind of wrapped into the game and on a lot of different levels. Like the first and most important one that you probably noticed is how accessible the game is, right?
Absolutely.
Um, Emberwind is built on a proprietary engine that I put together called the Rise engine, which is just a fancy term for a extremely modular rule set. And an important thing about trying to make sure that you're helping people generate the greatest support group they can is to make sure that there's room at your gaming table for everyone. So to do that, I had to make sure that I wanted to create, I had to make sure I was creating a game system that didn't just appeal to your typical tabletop veteran, but also, let's say, their girlfriend who's always been interested but intimidated by a 300-page rulebook, right?
Yeah.
And then there's that, but like there's also like the role player versus the the combat oriented war gamer. Then there's the people who prefer doing their own custom content versus having something pre-written, and so on and so forth. So um, the one of the things that they always tell you for any good product, like regardless if it's in gaming or not, is to know your audience, right? And you specifically want to target an audience because that's where you're going to find the most commercial success. And I basically walked completely counter to that when I came up with the system. And it's one of actually the biggest challenges, not only making it all work in this way that hopefully you've had a chance to experience and feel that it really does,
Yeah.
but to do so in a way that I can still pitch it to people in a way where they can understand that, yeah, this is a great experience and get as much that they're looking for out of Emberwind, and that's it, right? No, nothing else. So um so yeah, like from the absolute most basic building blocks, like just the rule systems, uh that was designed in a way where every player can individually have their own rule set, right? They don't have to match together because I want to make sure that everyone got a chance to play at a place that they're comfortable with. Another place where psychology and psychological principles have been added to it is there's like a very specific educational psychology concept known as scaffolding. And scaffolding is like to make it break down super simply here, like I'm oversimplifying it. It's the process of like imagine yourself in a classroom, right? There is an expert who is teaching you things, right? The teacher slash professor at the front of it. And that's one way of learning. Scaffolding is where the entire classroom is engaged and you're capable of learning things off of one another, right? So if you kind of imagine the teacher, and this is not a great analogy, but the teacher is the GM who's memorized every book and has all the experience, right? And you've got a bunch of players sitting around the table that don't really know what they're doing, but they're just kind of following along and listening to whatever and agreeing to whatever the GM says. Um, what I wanted to do was give people the opportunity to learn, experience new skills as well, right? In a way where they're not forced to do it, but kind of like gently called out of their own comfort zone. So a quick example of that is like our role-playing systems. We have two completely different resolution systems, one being a dice rolling system and the other one being our deck of fates system. The dice rolling system is traditional. It's something that everyone who's played a tabletop game is probably familiar with, which is that when you're doing a interaction that isn't combat oriented, you will roll a die, compare that value to, or sorry, compare your roll result to a skill value, and whether or not you succeed or fail at the thing that you're saying you're doing is based on that particular roll. But like from me describing that function, you can already tell that no role playing involved. It's literally just ROLL playing, right? Because it comes down to just the die roll. And it doesn't really reward role playing unless you happen to have a GM who's very, very good at that type of thing. Um, but on, but like, what does that do to, let's say, narrative players, people who specifically want more role playing out of the game, right? They're not rewarded for doing all that, and it also makes it way harder to find a compatible group, right? Like I think the ratio is already pretty bad, where at least in D&D it's about 1 GM to 20 players or so, and that's not even talking about like how good that GM particularly is. And that has a lot to do with how challenging GMing is, to the point where like you can even find full-time employment just running games for people now. That that's actually results of how like game systems like the D20 system and so forth just assumes that you either know or don't know how to GM, and they don't do anything to teach you how. Like there's none of that middle step.
Right.
So anyways, going back to the whole role playing thing, for role players, we introduced a different system to it, right, called the Deck of Fates. And these two systems are completely interchangeable. That's actually one of the reasons why we use a roll low system. There's mathema magic behind that, which is the lamest thing I've said in a while. But so a skill check in Emberwind works differently than in like D&D or most tabletop games, because we give you a skill value and you are going to roll a d20 and try and get that number or under. If you roll, let's say your skill value is 12. If you roll a 12, 11, 10, whatever, all the way down to 1, you succeed, whereas a 13 and up is a failure. The reason why we did that, well, there's a lot of reasons why we did that, but none of them were just to be unique. One of the particular reasons is that it standardizes the score, because every value, right? Like it's not some random target number like 28 or something I have to look up in a book. Every value is out of 20. I know that for each integer, right, the value 1, the value 2, the value 3, and so forth is worth 5%. And because it's worth 5%, I can now convert the system to something else, right? So the Deck of Fates, for example, we set you up in a different way, right? Let's say you really want to role play and you're trying to convince me that you want to go, I don't know, buy like a sword or something like that, right, off of me. Well, in that particular interaction, if you have a fast talk skill of 12, we'll set up your deck in that same way, where initially you'll have 12 success cards and 8 failure cards, right? Same success rate as rolling a die. And now you and I could role play through the same. If you say things that convince me of what you want, I'll add success cards to the deck. Every time you flub, I'll add a failure card. And when we hit a natural concluding point to that particular scene, we'll draw a card, and your success rate, right, your success will be determined by that. But you'll see how your success rate was actually impacted by your actual role play, right? Like what you said in that situation. And like in that particular situation, if you're using, let's say, the Deck of Fate system, and I'm in your playing group, and I've always wanted to role play but never felt comfortable doing so, seeing you do this makes me feel a little more confident about myself, right? Through this repeated exposure, I might go, oh yeah, like that's a lot less scary, especially if I can turn it on or off and experiment with it, like down to every interaction, rather than just, you know, say that if I'm going to play this D&D game, I'm going to commit for 52 sessions of super hardcore role play when that's not what I necessarily feel like I have in me.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know that my group, you know, we played through Skies of Axia, and granted, we stuck with the more traditional dice rolling system. It's kind of what we know. We play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and this was kind of an easier way for us to transition to that system. But I just have to say, looking through like the hero manual, like seeing the number of rules variables that you guys have put into the game could make one person's experience entirely different from another group's entirely. And I have to say that personally, that was something that shocked me, is just seeing how many optional rules that you have that you could include if you want, or you don't have to include, to make it either a little bit more of like a hardcore experience if somebody wanted, or a very streamlined and very beginner friendly. Like this is a game I could easily see recommending to some of my friends that are probably like more video game oriented, or they're not used to playing a role playing game like Dungeons and Dragons. And I know for a fact that it can be really intimidating when you start. But just when it came to the way that you wanted to kind of design the feel for Emberwind, I know that you guys are you still working on the World of Adriel book, or has that been kind of like put on the back burner for the time being?
No, like I'm still working on it. It's
Okay.
just very slow going since the pandemic's really affected our bottom line.
Right.
So like it comes down to like after all the meetings, the financials, like all the investment stuff flying around, like everything else, whatever I have left in my time is what I put towards the new project.
Okay.
So
Well, the main reason I was asking you that is just when it came to designing the aesthetics of Emberwind, like I love all the artwork that you guys have up on your website and your books. It is absolutely stunning. But I was wondering, like, what inspired the way that you wanted Emberwind to look in your mind, and when you
Oh,
are presenting this out to people.
so, uh, I mean, what really inspired it was a bunch of different things. Like the specific look, the fact that it's a science fancy world of like shattered continents and floating airships and all that. That's like I can refer back to like all these different pulp culture things that like I watched, that I read, that I had a chance to experience growing up, right? Because they're all things that I super loved. And if you want a list of that, I can definitely provide that for you.
If you could just at least cite just a couple of examples,
Sure.
I always love seeing what inspires other people.
Um, I think probably if I had to like list off some of my biggest inspirations, it'd probably be things like the original Guild Wars, right?
Okay,
I don't know if
yeah.
you've played that at all.
I played Guild Wars 2, and my partner absolutely loves Guild Wars 2. That is her favorite game,
Yeah,
pretty much of all time for the time being.
I played Guild Wars 2 as well. I really enjoyed that too, but it was very different than Guild Wars 1. Guild Wars 1 was hell, there's no other game out there quite like it. Like Guild Wars 1 was very different on its own. It really took the idea of like an instanced RPG experience, narratively driven experience, and made it that. So in like a day and age when every game coming out was an MMO, it branded itself completely differently as a co-RPG.
Okay.
I think that's even stated like on their product, like on the box when you picked it up. Um, and like it almost feels like a closer analog to playing a game like Baldur's Gate or like but with your friends, right? Where you can experience in the storytelling together. And it had like a great deal of player expression where with a combination of two classes together and literally over 1,000 skills, you could come up with whatever ability you wanted to. And that, was transformed in a very interesting way when Guild Wars 2 came out, right? Not only did they simplify the game experience and really stylize it, they also set it up in a way where, um, like the history of Guild Wars 2, the story that's you're playing there, it happens like 100-ish years after the events of Guild Wars 1. And you
Right.
realize that like narratively, all the choices you made that were the best ones in Guild Wars 1 actually really messed up the world. And like in Guild Wars 2, you're like, damn, I have to live with the consequences of all that. And like that's a large part. It's not the only one, but like that's a large part of the inspiration that kind of set the tone for Emberwind, right? Like I really wanted, and this goes back to the psychology thing, to create something where there's a world that can ultimately feel like your choices matter, right? That there is a consequence to your actions that you can really learn from and feel like you are the main character of your story, right? Rather than just some murder hobo that happens to be traveling with other murder hobos because it's convenient to the plot.
Right.
Yeah,
Um,
and
oh, go ahead.
oh, sorry, yeah, and the aesthetic actually is built around that too. So the original art style was designed by an art studio called Crush Visual, which is made up of some of my really really great friends, and this is a really unique thing about the Canadian industry because we don't really have all that many studios ourselves, at least not like mainline studios that people have heard of. Instead, most creatives up here work for hire as like boutique studios for other things, and we outsource a lot. So games, sorry, like companies like Ubisoft, EA, all that have hired Crush to do a lot of their work before. And Crush is actually primarily known as a film studio. And when I first talked to them about kind of the world I wanted to do, and I wanted to find like a unique feel to it, right? Not just straight fantasy, not typical science fiction, but like a blend of science fantasy that people don't really see, along with this idea of this like dynamic world that could evolve and change based on the choices that the players are making in it. We came up with the particular style that you see there. It's this evocative storybook style that's supposed to really try and pull you into the narrative, where the story can be told by the pictures alone. Like, you don't need any of the words that are written. Not that the words are bad. In fact, the words are fantastic. The writers that we have are wonderful. But, but yeah, the artwork in itself is also just beyond stellar. And this is unfortunately something that's become defunct for us. But one of the other reasons why we developed the particular style that we have is as a service to the world, actually. Or not the world, but like to specifically like young and upcoming artists. Crush Visual also doubled way back when as a school for art students, and specifically to train students with the skills they need to get into the industry, not just like how to hold a paintbrush or like color theory or something like that. And that particular school, called Talent Tree, the students needed, to not only be able to produce artwork, but also produce something of a good portfolio piece so that they'd be able to actually step forward in the world. And the style that was developed for Emberwind is a very like time efficient art style that a lot of the students were able to pick up, contribute to, and basically use that as a springboard to get them off into the world as well.
Oh, that
That's
is
where
awesome.
a lot of the like evocative brushstrokes, that energy comes from, because of how the fidelity of the artwork works.
Okay. Really, just another major question that I have for you is, if you have somebody that is interested in checking out Emberwind, and if they want to really get started with their group of friends, do you have any just general tips for new players when they're starting out?
Like RPGs in general, or Emberwind specifically?
Well, let's go a little bit Emberwind specific in this case. Like, if you have somebody that, I know you guys go to a lot of conventions, if you have people that are hearing about you for the first time, what do you tell them when they're talking with you about it?
Well, that's a weird one too, because I kind of cater what I say based on the person that's
Okay.
coming up to the booth, right? Like a DM, or let's say a forever DM coming up to me and sighing about and lamenting about like how horrible it is to always be a DM and all the work they have to do. I'll tell them about, for example, our foe system that has their own AI that can control itself, and for your particularly annoying players, we even have like a learning system where it can rewrite its AI to crush their power gaming, right? Like that.
Yeah.
That's a real selling point to them. But like, if I had to pick a singular pitch that I'd give people, it would just be to try the game, right? Like, this is Emberwind is very, like, no matter how similar it might seem to any other RPG out there, and it promises to deliver that type of experience. What Emberwind is trying to do is wholly different. We don't want you playing our game our way. We want you playing your game your way. And Emberwind is a vehicle for that, right? Like, anyone who's played a tabletop game before will tell you that they're probably not playing it the exact way the book spelled it out. They've homebrewed something, they've adapted in some way. We just made that official. We made that a whole part of the actual game system that you're interacting with. And if you get a chance to try the game, if you get a chance to enjoy the game and realize that it's not for you, don't put the book down. Just tell us about that, because chances are, we're just like you guys. We're excited, happy gamers, thrilled to always kind of push the envelope. And if you let us know, like, hey, you're missing a feature that, a lot of people I think would really like, I'd probably tell you like, huh, yeah, this person's right. I am an idiot. Let's go add that to the game.
Okay. And then really, I guess like the last major question I have is, do you have anything that you would be comfortable in announcing that either you're working on or future plans for Emberwind are at this time?
Yeah. So, as you kind of alluded to earlier, one of the major projects that we're working on is the Storyteller's Guide to Axia. It's a huge project and not one that we were initially anticipating to release at any point, at least in the next couple of years. And the reason for that is just because COVID's completely changed up the playing field and how we've had to do things. Originally, our plan was to release a bunch of campaign books, all these sequels that would help people who have picked up kind of our introductory campaigns get a chance to get a feel for the game, to develop the world, and then at the end of playing through all the different sequels and storylines, end up with their own unique version of Axie before we hit them in the face with a, hey, look at how huge this world is, look at all the opportunities. But because of how COVID's affected kind of our revenue streams, we went the other route where we actually went and released Nexus first. We're still currently working on it, which is the website full of all these different community tools and so forth. And currently, the project I'm working on is getting out the upcoming EULAs for API access, so community developers can do whatever they want with our content. But yeah, if we're creating a website full of tools for the community to develop content with, they're probably going to struggle if we don't give them a bunch of material to draw from first, and also some guides on how to use that. Hence why we're working on this particular book at the moment. It is a very expansive book. It's probably our most ambitious project to date. But the other thing is not only are we a small team that's working on it when we can, I'm also very much of the opinion to never rush something. Like, it'll be ready when it's ready, and we want to make sure that whatever we put out is fantastic and meets up to the standards that all of our fans and players deserve.
Okay. And then really before we close this out, is there anything else that you just feel that people should know about Emberwind just as a whole?
Yeah. The one thing that I'll caution anyone who's listened this far into this interview about is that despite my background as a therapist, and despite my givings about the game being built in a way to help promote kind of like well-being for people, it is in no way a game made for therapy. It's, at the end of the day, a fun experience. And that's really all anyone should be looking for out of it, right? And not everyone's necessarily going to have fun with it too. Like, it's okay not to like my game, guys. It's fine. But like, give it a try. I think a lot of people, even if you've had no experience, or you're like a hardcore, I only played this version of this game for my entire life type, I think you'd be surprised by some of the stuff that you find in the game. And who knows, maybe some of the particular content that's there might even be something that you end up adopting or taking back to whatever game that you do end up ultimately sticking with and enjoying. But we know, for example, like the storyteller book that I was just telling you about, one of the things that's been a real challenge and why it's taking so long for us to put this together is that we're trying to write it in a way where the entire thing is also compatible with 5e. Because we want to make sure that people are exposed to our rule sets, our systems, but in a way where it's meeting them where they want to find our content.
All right, and I'm going to make sure that something that we have is that in the description, so people can check out, Emberwind's website. I believe that you have a demo book that's available if people want to just look over some of the rule systems. That is free. It also has a couple of the classes that are available for people to check out. It includes, I believe it's the first year of play, so you can kind of see what some of the abilities that classes can get are.
Yep.
But again, Derek, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here and talking about this game. I do think that this is something that has some amazing potential, and I know that I had a lot of fun running it, and my group had a lot of fun when we played through it.